Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Esoteric. Today we are diving back into the works of Mr. Aleister Crowley. This is Liber 4. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Liber 4 with Part 3, Chapter 1, The Principles of Ritual. There is a single main definition of the object of all magical ritual. It is the uniting of the microcosm with the macrocosm. The supreme and complete ritual is therefore the invocation of the holy guardian angel. See the Book of Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage and Liber 418, 8th Ether, Liber Samek. See Appendix 3. Or, in the language of mysticism, union with God. I would say this one should be your goal, not the other one. You should not be invoking angels, and I say that fully understanding that other people have other paths, but on the path that I am on, I have had no necessity for invoking any of the deities, right? Or the things that people consider to be deities. If you're giving it a name, it's not God. God is beyond all names. God is beyond all personification. God is all things, and you should be seeking union with God, not to invoke any particular entity. Some of these entities are aligned with the betterment of humankind, but the greater proportion of them that interact with people on an invocation basis are not. They are aligned for the detriment of humankind, but they can lie to you and they can tell you that they are bound. They can tell you that you've got the true name and therefore they can't do anything against you. They can tell you that the symbol that you drew upon the ground actually holds some purpose and meaning, but there is no real way to confirm that. There is no real way to understand that. And everything that I have done up to and including healing myself, which is a thing, affecting the weather, which has happened, working with other people, all of the things that I have done has not had to invoke any particular name. I did not invoke the holy guardian angels. I did not invoke Yahweh or Jehovah or any of the other names. No names, not a single one. I did not invoke anyone, but I have results that he doesn't, right? Once again, Mr. Crowley did not have the effects that you would get from doing these things in the right way. He is quite literally someone speaking out of his ass. And that doesn't mean that he didn't try. It means that he was not successful. The difference between these operations is more of a theoretical than of practical importance. No. It is not. It is of practical importance. If you are calling upon God, right, that is not using a name, simply becoming one with God and working through prayer, fasting, and meditation is completely separate from invoking an entity. Completely separate, those operations. It is not a theoretical difference. It is a practical difference. And it is of practical importance that you understand that there is a difference between seeking union with God and invoking an entity. It is exceedingly important that you understand that those are two completely different things. Back to the text. All other magic rituals are particular cases of this general principle, and the only excuse for doing them is that it sometimes occurs that one particular portion of the microcosm is so weak that its imperfection of impurity would vitiate the macrocosm of which it is the image, eidolon, or reflection. For example, God is above sex, and therefore neither man or woman, as such, can be said fully to understand, much less to represent God. It is therefore incumbent upon the male magician to cultivate those female virtues in which he is deficient, and in this task he must, of course, accomplished without in any way impairing his virility. It will then be lawful for the magician to invoke Isis and identify himself with her. If he fail to do this, his apprehension of the universe when he attains samadhi will lack the conception of maternity. The result will be a metaphysical and, by corollary, ethical limitation in the religion which he founds. Judaism and Islam are a striking example of this failure. All right, let's talk practicality. Okay. You do not need any ritual in order to come into accordance with God. That is something that I stand on firmly and fully. You can use them, but they are not necessary. They are possibly needed if you need the mimetic device in order to remember the procedures to do the things in the right order. But there is a lot of contention about what things and what order. The things that I do are entirely intrinsically internal: prayer, fasting, and meditation. Prayer is speaking, seeking, moving, and doing, right? If you are in control, it is prayer, not meditation. Fasting is limiting yourself from some specific thing for a specific amount of time to reach a specific goal. That allows you, like if you fast by not eating for a couple of days, it allows you to hear better, right? And that is what meditation is. It is you shutting up, not talking, not moving the energies, not asking for things. That is not meditation. Not visualizing the light. That is not meditation. All of that is prayer. Meditation is the stilling of oneself to become one with the oneness, seeking union with God. That is meditation. That is the intrinsic part of everything that I do. I do work the energies. That is part of prayer. I do ask for things. That is part of prayer. I do all of these things. Part of the process of the balance of the internal, which I fully describe in here, is the balance between the masculine and feminine, and all things contain both the masculine and the feminine. That is the second law of creation. Right? The first one is all things are one. They all exist. Everything is part of the spirit, but we are differentiated, and that differentiation is the second law. All things contain both the masculine and the feminine, both the positive and the negative, the creative and destructive forces, and your job is to balance those. Right now, you do that by considerations of the virtues and the vices. These are coins. They are two sides of the same thing. Love and wrath is one coin. Lust and chastity is another coin. Gluttony and temperance, greed and charity, pride and humility, sloth and diligence, hope and despair. These are the 7 virtues and the 7 vices that you are to strike a balance between. You are not meant to be chaste, almost certainly, right? There are a few people who are called to never have sex. That is a vanishingly small percentage of the population. It is almost no one, and it is almost certainly not you. It is the same for all of the virtues and the vices. You are meant to partake in the vices with limitations, right? The overtaking is what makes it a vice. The consumption of things is not wrong. The overconsumption of things is wrong, and that includes your pride, right? If you are overtaking in pride, that's a bad thing, but you should be proud of a job well done. It doesn't make you better than anyone. Maintain a spirit of humility. There is a balance to be stricken, and it is vitally important that you do so before you attempt any of these magical things. I fully endorse that. But his understanding of it and my understanding of it are not the same understandings of it. He has several things that are not entirely aligned. He does not understand the difference between prayer and meditation. For instance, he has a completely incorrect viewpoint upon the logos. Most people do. He claims for himself the intrinsically evil parts of life. That should let you know a little bit about his motivations and what you should be doing. And if he is invoking things, you probably do not want to invoke the same things. But, alright, so it will be then lawful for a magician to invoke Isis. There is no law That is not part of the law. That is not one of the laws of creation. Invoking anyone is something that you can do, but Isis doesn't really exist, not in the way that it is conceptualized. It is the conceptualization of the feminine that is being discussed. You don't need to call a name. If you do call a name, you're doing it wrong. It's really that simple. And that is up to and including, right? God is the appellation that can be given because that is the very broad, general sense, right? And if you narrow it down to a specific name for God, you're doing it wrong. Also, right, the ethical limitation of the religion which he founds, you should bear in mind that he did indeed found a religion. It is called Thelema. There are many, many problems with that. Almost as many problems as there are with these two particular ones right here. Now, we have done the entirety of the, well, not the entirety, almost the entirety of the Old Testament in a Bible study. We read it aloud as we are doing here. Judaism is a striking example of failure in religiosity. That is true. There is very many things that you can find contention with God in the Old Testament. He was ignorant, right? He didn't know things. That is not God, right? He was not omnipotent. He could not do whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. That is not God. He required blood sacrifice. That is not God. There are a lot of problems with the various entities which are invoked in the name of Judaism, right? Yahweh, Jehovah, those are entities. They have purposes and they have histories, and you should probably look those up if you are willing to invoke those. There are many problems with Judaism and Islam, the entirety of their laws, for example. But outside of that, they are absolutely unbalanced towards the masculine, right? One of the laws in Judaism is that if you rape someone, there's no criminal penalty to that. You have to pay her father a little bit of money, and then you've got to marry her. That is the absolutely perfect result for forcing your attentions upon someone else, right? You should have to pay their parents and then marry them. That is exactly the consequence that should come from that if God himself sets down the law, right? Many problems with Judaism. All right. To take another example, the ascetic life, which devotion to magic so often involves, argues of poverty of nature, a narrowness, a lack of generosity. Nature is infinitely prodigal. Not one in a million seeds ever comes to fruition. Whoso fails to recognize this, let him invoke Jupiter. All right, now that is a massive assumption. It is probably true, right? I had to pause to think about it, but most of the seeds that are released from a pine tree, for instance, don't actually make a tree, right? The overwhelming majority of them do not, and so, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But this ascetic life, which devotion to magic so often involves, is a life of pride for the most part. There are times to fast. Once again, I just told you about that, right? Preparation to hear back from God, the denial of self in order to accomplish a goal, that is perfectly fine. But if you make a lifestyle out of making dietary choices because you think it makes you better than someone else, that is pride, right? I don't eat meat, I am better than you. If you don't believe that a vegetarian thinks that they're better than you, wait 5 minutes. They will let you know they are better than you, right? That is a prideful statement. That is most of asceticism wrapped up. I'm better than you because I only drink bread and water for 6 days out of the week, right? That is prideful. That is you in your head. I am better than you. That is what the root of that is, and that is most of ascetic life. That is not to say that there are not people who do truly follow the correct way with these, right? Living in not really poverty, because you are not called for poverty either, right? There are, again, vanishingly few people who are called to give away all that you have and come and follow me, but it is vanishingly small. You are meant to have things. You are meant to give things away, just not all of the things, right? You are supposed to have some things. That is kind of why we're here. There is definitely a pride that can be taken from the ascetic life, and that is most often the fruit that it bears. All right. Let him invoke Jupiter again. Be careful what you're invoking. There are much deeper considerations in which it appears that everything that is right. They are set forth elsewhere. We can only summarize them here by saying that the survival of the fittest is their upshot. The danger of ceremonial magic, the subtlest and deepest danger, is this: that the magician will naturally tend to invoke that partial being which most strongly appeals to him, so that his natural excess in that direction will be further exaggerated. Let him, before beginning his work, endeavor to map out his own being and arrange his invocations in such a way as to redress the balance. That is not the subtlest and deepest danger. The subtlest and deepest danger is the fact that the entities can lie to you. Right? Only part of them, like some of them can't lie to you. The ones that are aligned for the betterment of humankind, they can't. But the ones that are aligned for the detriment of humankind, they can. And they can deceive you into thinking that they are the other ones. That happened to Abraham when he went up the mountain to sacrifice his child. According to the story, there are reasons to doubt the story, I understand that. But according to the story, there was an entity that came to Abraham and said, hey, go up this mountain and kill your child. And he's like, bet. And so he runs up the mountain with his son. Doesn't tell anybody what he's doing. He goes up there, he ties him up, and he gets ready to kill him. And another entity comes in and says, what the fuck are you doing, bruh? That is not the right way. If you got to kill something, kill this ram. That is how that story plays out. Go back and read it. Now, that is not taking in the extra biblical stories where apparently the child decided he wanted to be the sacrifice, which is directly contradictory to the story in Genesis. But there are these two accounts of this particular end thing, right? Jason, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I do like to have the full information. But according to Genesis, that's not how that happened, right? He ran into this entity. The entity told him, kill your kid. He went up the mountain to kill the kid. And then another entity comes along, and it specifies that it is another entity, by the way. It's another entity comes along and says, what are you doing? Stop. I mean, that is a repeated pattern through Genesis and Exodus. You should check that out. Whenever there are two entities that show up, they are in direct contradiction to one another. Normally, the first one is telling them to do something pretty horrible, and then the second one comes along and is like, what are you even doing? You should check that out. It is a repeating theme. All right. So that is not the subtlest and deepest danger. Now, it is a danger, right? You are going to attract the entity that is going to lead you down the wrong direction. That is exactly who is going to show up when you do your invocations, because you don't have the right name. All right. Let him, before beginning his work, endeavor to map out his own being and arrange his invocations in such a way to redress the balance. The ideal method of doing this is given in Liber 9:13, Equinox 7. Oh my. This, of course, should have been done in a preliminary fashion during the preparation of the weapons and furniture of the temple. To consider in a more particular manner this question of the nature of ritual, we may suppose that he finds himself lacking in that perception of the value of life and death, alike of individuals and of races, which is characteristic of nature. He has perhaps a tendency to perceive the first noble truth uttered by Buddha, that everything is sorrow. And this is one of those things that I absolutely intrinsically disagree with. Everything is not sorrow. It is not. There is plenty of joy. I've had a lot of joy in my life. I got to marry the love of my life. I got to have two wonderful children and raise them, and my circumstances in the middle of that may not have been ideal, but I had so much joy doing it. And that lets you know right there, everything is not sorrow. You got a problem with your theology, right? This everything is sorrow, that is victim mentality, and it is rife in the control systems. Right? It is so overpacked. You are condemned to hell unless you accept this blood sacrifice. That is victim mentality. Everything is sorrow. This is a miserable existence. That is victim mentality. Everything is an illusion. It doesn't really matter. That is victim mentality. And I have zero time for that. Everything is not sorrow. There are sorrowful moments, and you can choose to focus on those, but there are joyful moments as well. And you can choose to focus on those just as much, even more. And if you do so, guess what you reap? Guess what the benefits of those fields are? Happiness, love, joy. That is what you reap if you do not believe that everything is sorrow. If you change your fucking mindset, it makes all of the difference in the world. It really does. And I say that as someone who was this. Once upon a time, you could very well have described me as nihilistic. I am no longer that way because of the things that I have experienced. Back to the text. Nature, it seems, is a tragedy. Why? Once again, victim mentality. He is impressing upon you that these things are, but they are not. He has perhaps even experienced the great trance called sorrow. He should then consider whether or not there is some deity who expresses this cycle and yet whose nature is joy. He will find what he requires in Dionysus. This guy cannot be consistent. Absolutely cannot be consistent. There are three main methods of invoking any deity. No, there's not. There is no method of invoking a deity. There are methods of invoking entities that have convinced people that they are deities, but there is no way to invoke the deity. Right? You can ask for God's assistance. That is not invoking the deity. The first method consists of devotion to that deity, and being mainly mystical in character need not be dealt with in this place, especially as perfect instruction exists in Liber 175. See the appendix. The second method is the straightforward ceremonial invocation. It is the method which was usually employed in the Middle Ages. Its advantage is its directness, its disadvantage its crudity. The Goetia gives clear instruction in this method, as so do many other rituals, white and black. We shall presently devote some space to a clear exposition of this art. In the case of Bacchus, however, we may roughly outline the procedure. This guy, we find that the symbolism of Tifereth expresses the nature of Bacchus. If you are unaware, we are doing a study of the Hebrew alphabet with Jason from Green Country Agroforestry. We are discovering what the words mean, the meaning behind the words, and some of the lessons that we can take from the words here live on Saturdays at noon Central Time, and we will probably get a better explanation of Tifereth from him. So you should check that out if you are interested in those type of things. It is then necessary to construct a ritual of Tifereth, and so you can invoke Bacchus. Let us open the book 777. We shall find in line 7 of each column the various parts of our required apparatus. Having ordered everything duly, we shall exalt the mind by repeating prayers or conjurations to the highest conception of the God, until, in one sense or another of the word, he appears to us and floods our consciousness with the light of his divinity. Once again, I will point out that Bacchus is not God. Right? If you are placing a name upon it, it is not the deity. It is your understanding of the deity, right? There are many people who misunderstand the deity. I do not claim to have full knowledge of the deity, right? I have some understanding of the Trinity, right? Whether or not that is absolute truth, that is something we will find out at the end. That is something I conjecture about. I even firmly assert it, but it is still in the realm of speculation because it deals with the end, and none of us will be there for that, right? We will all go. None of us will be back to talk. And if we do, that can be dismissed as well. Right? Now, I do not dismiss these angelic encounters, the out-of-body experience, the near-death experiences. I've had several of them myself, and so it does lead to things. Right? But if you are invoking a name, you are probably doing it wrong. Not even probably. You are doing it wrong. The third method is the dramatic, perhaps the most attractive of all. Certainly it is so to the artist temperament, for it appeals to his imagination through his ascetic sense. Its disadvantage lies principally in the difficulty of its performance by a single person, but it has the sanction of the highest antiquity, and is probably the most useful for the foundation of a religion. And again, he founded a religion. The sanction of the highest antiquity is not something that necessarily means anything, right? We have discovered several times that no matter how long something has been written, it does not make it true. No matter how many people have believed in it over the course of that time, it does not make it true. See the Old Testament. There are many, many, many things that are provably untrue. It is the method of Catholic Christianity and consists in the dramatization of the legend of the god. The Bacchae of Euripides is a magnificent example of such a ritual. So also, though to a less degree, is the Mass. We may also mention many of the degrees in Freemasonry, particularly the third. The 5-degree equals 6-degree ritual published in number 3 of the Equinox is another example. In the case of Bacchus, one commemorates firstly his birth of a mortal mother who has yielded her treasure house to the Father of all, of the jealousy and rage excited by this incarnation, and of the heavenly protection afforded to the infinite. Look, check it out. If the Father of all is jealous and rageful, it is not the Father of all. Next should be commemorated the journeying westward upon an ass. There is no reason to believe that happened. Now comes the great scene of the drama. The gentle, exquisite youth with his following, chiefly composed of women, seems to threaten the established order of things, and that established order takes steps to put an end to the upstart. We find Dionysus confronting an angry king, not with defiance but with meekness, yet with a subtle confidence, an underlying laughter. His forehead is wreathed with vine tendrils. He is an effeminate figure with those broad leaves clustered upon his brow. But those leaves hide horns. King Pentheus, representative of respectability. If it's got horns, it's probably the wrong entity. There is a much deeper interpretation in which Pentheus is himself the dying god. See my Good Hunting and J.G. Fraser's Golden Bough. King Pentheus, representative of respectability, is destroyed by his pride. He goes out into the mountains to attack the women who have followed Bacchus, the youth whom he has mocked, scourged, and put in chains, yet who has only smiled, and by these women in their divine madness he is torn to pieces. It has already seemed impertinent to say so much when Walter Pater has told the story with such sympathy and insight. We will not further transgress by dwelling upon the identity of this legend with the course of nature, its madness, its prodigality, its intoxication, its joy, and above all, its sublime persistence through the cycles of life and death. The pagan reader must labor to understand this in Pater's Greek studies, and the Christian reader will recognize it, incident for incident, in the story of Christ. This legend is but the dramatization of spring. The magician who wishes to invoke Bacchus by this method must therefore arrange a ceremony in which he takes the part of Bacchus, undergoes all his trials, and emerges triumphant from beyond death. He must, however, be warned against mistaking the symbolism. In this case, for example, the doctrine of individual immortality has been dragged in to the destruction of truth. It is not that utterly worthless part of man, his individual consciousness as John Smith, which defies death, that consciousness which dies and is reborn in every thought. That which persists, if anything persists, is his real John Smithiness, a quality of which he was probably never conscious in his life. See the Book of Lies, Liber 333, for several sermons to this effect. Caps, Alpha, Data, Eta, Iota, Epsilon, Iota, Sigma, Iota, Eta, Kappa, Alpha, Kappa, Eta in particular. The reincarnation of the Ku, or magical self, is another matter entirely too abstruse to discuss in this elementary manual, once again giving reference to something you will not discuss. Note, I have made a correction in the above list of chapters from Liber 333. The published text cites Iota Diagamma, which does not exist. The correct chapter is Iota Sigma, which does exist and discusses the subject. Even that does not persist. unchanged. Sorry. It is always growing. The cross is a barren stick, and the petals of the rose fall and decay. But in the union of the cross and the rose is a constant succession of new lives. See the Book of Lies, Liber 333, for several sermons to this effect. The whole theory of death must be sought in Liber 111, Aleph. Without this union, and without this death, the individual, the cycle would be broken. A chapter will be consecrated to removing the practical difficulties of this method of invocation. It will doubtless have been noted by the acumen of the reader that in the great essentials these three methods are one. In each case, the magician identifies himself with the deity invoked. To invoke is to call in, just as to evoke is to call forth. This is the essential difference between the two branches of magic. In invocation, the macrocosm floods the consciousness. In evocation, the magician, having become the macrocosm, creates a microcosm. You invoke a god into the circle. You evoke a spirit into the triangle. In the first method, identity with the god is attained by love and by surrender, by giving up or suppressing all irrelevant and illusionary parts of yourself. It is the weeding of a garden. Now, this is close to the truth, right? I do not invoke God. I do, however, invite him into my circle, right? What is my circle? The divine aura, right? It encapsulates you and holds you together. It is the part that separates you from the other. It is the part that keeps you as you, right? The circle that surrounds you. It is a sphere, but you can conceptualize it as a circle, right? That is the part where I have invoked God. Now, I didn't do that by calling his name. I did that by aligning myself with balance. And by balancing myself in accordance with the will of God, I allowed God to come into my life with his will. And so my life has shaped itself into the thing that resembles what God would want, at least in my estimation. And so I do this. But I don't do this in a ceremony. I don't do this in a circle. I don't do this with tools. I do this mentally by accepting, by balancing, by shadow work, and doing all of the hard parts. Right? That's how you do this. Not by saying, will you please come and inhabit me? That is a damned stupid thing to do. The second method, the second method, identity, is attained by paying special attention to the desired part of yourself. Positive, as the first method is negative. It is the potting out and watering of a particular flower in the garden, and the exposure of it to sun. And the third, identity, is attained by sympathy. It is very difficult for the ordinary man to lose himself completely in the subject of a play or of a novel. But for those who can do so, this method is unquestionably the best. Observe. Each element in this cycle is of an equal value. It is wrong to say triumphantly, mors juna vitae, unless you add with equal triumph, vitae juna mortis. I'm not going to pull it up. To one who understands this chain of the eons from the point of view alike of the sorrowing Isis and of the triumphant Osiris, not forgetting their link in the destroyer Apophis, there remains no secret veiled in nature. He cries that name of God which throughout history has been echoed by one religion or to another, the infinite swelling paean. I-O. I-O. That's close. Or is it? This name, I-A-O, is Kabbalistically identical with that of the Beast. Here we go again. And with his number, 666, so that he invokes the former, invokes also the latter. Also with I was and the number 93, say chapter 5. Once again, I will point out that Mr. Crowley called himself the Beast. He identified all of the various women that he slept with as his scarlet women. He called several of them Babylon, and He claimed Our Lady Babylon. He was intrinsically aligned with the detriment of humankind in every single instance in his life. That is an important thing to remember, and when he gives you things, you should take them with grains of salt because of that. Now, this IAO, it is close to a sound, right? And I cannot give you the sound. I have talked about the sound. The sound is the word that the Masons are looking for. It is close to this. It is not exactly this, right? But who can say what exactly it is? Where does it start? Where does it end? When is the beginning? When is the end? When does the actual utterance begin, right? It is a continuous sound. It is a cycle that happens, and who knows when the beginning and the end is. And so, if you are calling upon a name, you are probably doing it wrong. Once again. Alright, we do have time. Alright, Chapter 2, the formulae of the elemental weapons. Before discussing magical formulae in detail, one may observe that most rituals are composite and contain many formulae, which must be harmonized into one. The first formula is that of the wand, and the sphere, the principle which the magician wishes to invoke. He rises from point to point in a perpendicular line and then descends, or else, beginning at the top, he comes directly down, invoking first the god of that sphere by devout supplication. I will point out that he is... Right. There are tools. You can use the tools. They may be needed. They are not necessary. There is no tool that you have to have external to yourself in order to do anything that I have done. That is not to say that I have the only way or that the things that I have done are the only things that can be done. But I have had effects without using any wands external from yourself, right? Now, there are the internal tools, and every one of the tools that he lists as external, with the exception of the painful ones, which are completely unnecessary. Other than that, all of these things are an internal, right? There is the wand of directing your will. There is the sword of discernment. There is the cup of understanding. These are all internal things. They are not external things. The ceremonies are tools. They are not necessary. They can be needed. The tools are tools. They are not necessary. They can be needed. You can do any of the magical things without them, at least according to my understanding, and the things that I have actually accomplished. And so, right, it doesn't matter if you have a wand, right? I have one right there. And sitting right next to the monkey, that brown thing right there where my finger is, that is a wand. It is from a cypress tree. It came off of the taproot that they tore up at a school. It was a 200-year-old tree. I created that wand myself. I don't use it for magic. It's more of a novelty than anything, right? That doesn't mean that I haven't tried. It just means that I haven't had any effects. These bowls right here, there's a bowl right there, there's a bowl right there. They are slapped full of semi-precious stones. If you name it, it's probably in one of those bowls. I have done various things with them, and they are effective tools. You can change vibratory patterns, but they don't do it on their own. You have to do it. You have to energize. You have to absorb. Those are things that you put into place, and those are focus. They help to clarify, but they do nothing by themselves. None of the tools hold power that you don't put into it. You can create invocations. You can energetically invest tools, but none of those are necessary. And so I've already covered the tools in part 2 of this particular study. I'm going to try not to stop too much from here on out to point out that you do not need these tools. Bear in mind that whenever he is talking about them, the tools that are most effective are the internal ones. All right. Beware, O brother, lest thou bend the knee. Liber 220 teaches the proper attitude. See also Liber 300 and, 50 and 40. And furthermore, there is special instruction, chapters 15 and elsewhere. If you want the proper attitude, I got a much thinner, much more easily accessible reference. Alright. Invoking first the god of that sphere by devout supplication that he may deign to send the appropriate archangel. He then beseeches the archangel to send the angel or angels of that sphere to his aid. And just like the tools are not necessary, none of these angels are. We have hit that hard enough in the last one. I'm not going to do it again. Right? He conjures this angel or angels to send the intelligence in question, and this intelligence he will conjure with authority to compel the obedience of the spirit and his manifestation. To this spirit he issues commands. It will be seen that this is a formula rather of evocation than of invocation. And for the latter, the procedure, though apparently the same, should be conceived of in a different manner, which brings it under another formula, that of tetragrammaton. The essence of the force invoked is one, but the god represents the germ or beginning of the force. The archangel is development, and so on, until with the spirit we have the completion and perfection of that force. The formula of the cup is not so well suited for evocations, and the magical hierarchy is not involved in the same way, for the cup, being passive rather than active, is not fitting for the magician to use in anything but in respect of anything but the highest. In practical working, it consequently means little but prayer, and that prayer the prayer of silence. Considerations which might lead to a contrary conclusion are unsuited to this treatise. The formula of the dagger is again unsuitable for either purposes, since the nature of the dagger is to criticize, to destroy, to disperse, and all true magical ceremonies tend to concentration. The dagger will therefore appear principally in the banishings, preliminary to the ceremony proper. The formula of the pentacle is again of no particular use, for the pentacle is inert. In fine, the formula of the wand is the only one in which we need more particularly concern ourselves. Later, these remarks are amplified and to some extent modified. Now, in order to invoke any being, it is said by Hermes Trismegistus that the Magi employed three methods. The first, for the vulgar, is that of supplication. In this crude objective theory is assumed as true. There is a god named A, whom you, B, proceed to petition, in exactly the same sense as a boy might ask his father for pocket money. The second method involves a little more subtlety, inasmuch as the magician endeavors to harmonize himself with the nature of the god, and to a certain extent exalts himself in the course of the ceremony. But the third method is the only one worthy of our consideration. This consists of a real identification of the magician and the god. Note that to do this in perfection involves the attainment of a species of samadhi, and this fact alone suffices to link infragably magic with mysticism. If this is saying that you are the god, then this is going to be absolutely incorrect. If this is coming into accordance with the god, which would actually be this second method, it would be correct. And so, let's see what he says. Let us describe the magical method of identification. The symbolic form of the god is first studied with as much care as an artist would bestow upon his model, so that a perfectly clear and unshakable mental picture of the god is presented in the mind. If you can visualize it, it's not God. Similarly, the attributes of the god are enshrined in speech, and such speeches are committed perfectly to memory. The invocation will then begin with a prayer to the god, commemorating his physical attributes, always with profound understanding of their real meaning. In the second part of the invocation, the voice of the god is heard, and his characteristic utterance is recited. In the third portion of the invocation, the magician asserts the identity of himself with the god. In the fourth portion, the god is again invoked, but as if by himself, as if it were the utterance of the will of the god that he should manifest in the magician. Open yourself up for possession. Absolutely. You can be possessed by entities. That is one of the intrinsic dangers of dealing with the entities. And if you are opening yourself up to anything that you have named, you are opening yourself up to possession. At the conclusion of this, the original object of the invocation is stated. Thus, in the invocation of O.T.O, which is to be found in the Rite of Mercury, And in Liber or whatever, the first parts begin with the words, Majesty of Godhead, wisdom crowned deity, thee I invoke, O thou of the ibis head, thee I invoke, and so on. At the conclusion of this, a mental image of the god, infinitely vast and infinitely splendid, should be perceived, in just the same sense as a man might see the sun. The second part begins with the words, Behold, I am yesterday, today, and the brother of tomorrow. The magician should imagine that he is hearing this voice, and at the same time that he is echoing it. That is also true of himself. This thought should so exalt him that he is able at its conclusion to utter the sublime words which open the third part. Behold, he is in me, and I am in him. At this moment he loses consciousness of his mortal being. He is that mental image which he previously but saw. This consciousness is only complete as he goes on. Mine is the radiance wherein Ptah floateth over his firmament. I travel upon high, I tread upon the firmament of Nu. I raise a flashing flame with the lightnings of my eye, ever rushing on in the splendor of the daily glorified Ra, giving my life to the treaders of earth. This thought gives the relation of God and man from the divine point of view. The magician is only recalled to himself at the conclusion of the third part, in which occur almost as if by accident the words, Therefore do all things obey my word. Yet in the fourth part, which begins, Therefore do thou come forth unto me, it is not really the magician who is addressing the god, it is the god who hears the far-off utterance of the magician. If this invocation has been correctly performed, the words of the fourth part will sound distant and strange. It is surprising that a dummy, so the magus now appears to himself, should be able to speak. The Egyptian gods are so complete in their nature, so perfectly spiritual, and yet so perfectly material that this one invocation is sufficient. The god bethinks him that the spirit of Mercury should now appear to the magician, and it is so. The Egyptian formula is therefore to be preferred to the hierarchical formula of the Hebrews with its tedious prayers, conjurations, and curses. It will be noted, however, that this invocation of O.T.O, which we have summarized, there is another formula contained, the reverberating or reciprocating formula, which may be called the formula of Horus and Harpocrates. The magician addresses the god with an act of projection of his will, and then becomes passive while the god addresses the universe. In the fourth part he remains silent, listening to the prayer which arises therefrom. The formula of this invocation of O.T.O may also be classed under tetragrammaton. The first part is fire, the eager prayer of the magician. The second, water, in which the magician listens to or catches the reflection of the god. The third part is air, the marriage of fire and water. The god and the man have become one, while the fourth part corresponds to the earth, the condensation or materialization of those three higher principles. With regard to the Hebrew formulae, it is doubtful whether most magicians who ever used them have ever properly grasped the principles underlying the method of identity. No passage which implies it occurs to mind. The extant rituals certainly give no hint of such a conception, or of any but the most personal and material view of the nature of things. They seem to have thought that there was an archangel named Ratziel, in exactly the same sense as there was a statesman named Richelieu, an individual being living in a definite place. He had possibly certain powers of a somewhat metaphysical order. He might be in two places at once, for example. Footnote. He can do this provided that he can travel with a speed exceeding that of light as he does. See A.S. Eddington, Space, Time, and Gravitation. Also, what means at once? Back to the text. For example, though even the possibility of so simple a feat, as in the case of spirits, seems to be denied by certain passages in extant conjurations which tell the spirit that if he happens to be in chains in a particular place in hell, or If some other magician is conjuring him so that he cannot come, then let him send a spirit of similar nature, or otherwise avoid the difficulty. But of course, so vulgar a conception would not occur to the student of Kabbalah. It is just possible that the Magi wrote their conjurations on this crude hypothesis in order to avoid the clouding of the mind by doubt and metaphysical speculation. He who became the Master Tyrian was once confronted by this very difficulty. Bear in mind that Master Tyrian is exactly Aleister Crowley, right? He keeps changing his name in an avoidance issue, right? He is doing that to avoid something. He is claiming something that is not his. That is not his name. Being determined to instruct mankind, he sought a simple statement of his object. His will was sufficiently informed by common sense to decide him to teach man the next step, the thing that was immediately above him. He might have called this God or the higher self, the Augietes or Adi Buddha, or 61 other things. But he had discovered that these were all one, and yet that each one represented some theory of the universe, which would ultimately be shattered by criticism. For he had already passed through the realm of reason, and knew that every statement contained an absurdity. He definitely did not reside in the realm of reason. He therefore said, "Let me declare this work under the title, The Obtaining of the Knowledge and Conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel." Because the theory implied in these words is so patently absurd that only simpletons would waste much time in analyzing it. It would be accepted as a convention, and no one would incur the grave danger of building a philosophical system upon it. With this understanding, we may rehabilitate the Hebrew system of invocations. The mind is the great enemy, so by invoking enthusiastically a person whom we know not to exist, we are rebuking that mind. Yet we should not refrain altogether from philosophizing in the light of the Holy Kabbalah. We should accept the magical hierarchy as a more or less convenient classification of the facts of the universe as they are known to us. And as our knowledge and understanding of these facts increase, we should endeavor to adjust our idea of what we mean by any symbol. I am only not shitting upon this because I am not familiar with the Kabbalah in a way that I would need to be in order to shit upon this. At the same time, let us reflect that there is a certain definite consensus of experience as to the correlation of the various beings of the hierarchy with these observed facts of magic. In the simple matter of astral vision, for example, one striking case may be quoted. Without telling him what it was, Master Tyrian once recited as an invocation of Sappho's Ode to Venus before a probationer of the A Delta, who was ignorant of Greek, the language of the ode. The disciple then went on an astral journey, and everything seen by him was without exception harmonious with Venus. This was true down to the smallest detail. He even obtained all the 4 color scales of Venus with absolute correctness. Considering that he saw something like 100 symbols in all, the odds against coincidence are incalculably great. Such an experience, and the records of the A Delta contain dozens of similar cases, affords proof, as absolute as any proof can be in this world of illusion, that the correspondences in Liber 777 really represent facts in nature. It suggests itself that this straightforward system of magic was perhaps never really employed at all. One might maintain that the invocations which have come down to us are but the ruins of the temple of magic. The exorcisms might have been committed to writing for the purpose of memorizing them, while it was forbidden to make any record of the really important parts of the ceremony. Such details of ritual as we possess are meager and unconvincing, and though much success has been attained in the quite conventional esoteric way by Frater Perdurabo and by many of his colleagues, yet ceremonies of this character have always remained tedious and difficult. It has seemed as if the success were obtained almost in spite of the ceremony. In any case, they are more mysterious parts of the ritual which have evoked the divine force. Such conjurations as those of the Goetia leave one cold, although notably in the second conjuration, there is a crude attempt to use that formula of commemoration in which we spoke in the preceding chapter. And once again, I will point out that Frater Perdurabo is him again, right? Master Tyrion, Frater Perdurabo, Aleister Crowley are all assumed names. Not one of them is his real name. And so that is telling you something about his nature. But he is telling you something about his effectiveness right here. First off, right? We have the lens of history to look back through. We did 2.5 hours studying the wiki about this particular man, and so we happen to know a few things about his life. Things that he did not know at this point in his life. At this point in his life was the very, very brief period of actual completion, right? I don't even want to say manifestation, because it wasn't even really that. This was the only very brief period in his life, like the entirety of his life, where things actually went in the right direction, right? This was 1914, according to the latest note we got, and that was when he was just about to go to Italy and open the villa where he gets kicked out for raping people, right? That's coming. We're not there yet. This is right at the time of him doing the blood magic, and he got some results. He did. And those results bore exactly the fruits that we would expect to see from blood magic. We have discussed this several times, but if you are invoking blood, you are doing it wrong, and you will get negative results every time. It doesn't matter if you are successful in the short run, you will be unsuccessful in the long run. And that is exactly what we got with Mr. Crowley. And so, when he says, though much success has been attained in the quite conventional esoteric way, he is a liar. It has not. That has not been true. There has been no success in his life all the way through. And he tells you that right here. It has seemed as if the success was obtained almost in spite of the ceremony. He did have a small measure of success. That is true. I do not deny that. But it was a very small measure, right? It was very, very small, like almost undetectable. In the scope of his life, it was like a couple of days. It was not a long extended period of happiness ever in his life. For the entirety of it. There was no, having wealth. He didn't get that. He didn't have success where people venerated him in the way that he would have liked. He didn't have any of that. He bore zero fruits for his efforts. That is something that I cannot emphasize enough. I cannot point out enough as we reach the end of this study, right? This is going to bring us to the end of the study. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion. I understand I hold some unconventional views and that I do step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. The reason I do this is because I have borne fruit. I have healed myself, and that is the most impressive thing out of all of it. The fact that I can talk to you is because of the things written in this book. I made a post today about my running. I was able to do 2 miles today walking, right? I've been doing 2 miles walking. I ran almost half of it today. I am 4 months and 2 days from a broken leg. Right? I have results. I have the fruit of the Spirit. I have a wife and children who love me. I have a domestic life that is enviable for a lot of people. Is everything perfect? No. Nothing is ever perfect, but it's pretty damn close. It really is, right? I don't have contention in my home. I have contention with one neighbor. That's it, right? And he's got the problem. He's schizophrenic and won't take his meds. That's the only reason we have a problem. And so I am bearing the fruits. I have the results. I don't claim to call the only way, but I'm damn sure on a way. I don't claim to be a master, but I'm damn sure an adept. I have the results that he never got in his entire life. Am I rich? No. Am I provided for? Yeah. Right? There is a difference, and that is the main difference. I am provided for. If I live exactly like this for the rest of my life, where I am just provided for, That's fine. I don't think that's the direction we're going, but it's fine if it is. It's not about the rewards, right? It is about the spiritual rewards. I am in this for the love. I am in this for the growth. I am in this for the healing. I am in this to help others heal. I am aligned with the betterment of humankind. And that is why I have the results. I follow the 8 laws of creation like dogmatically. I check myself against them all of the time. I make sure that my intentions are aligned with the betterment of everybody that can possibly be aligned, right? I'm not trying to align with the Rothschilds and the Soroses of the world who are out there doing nefarious things, right? That is not my alignment. I am diametrically opposed to them, but I'm aligning myself with anyone who is aligned with the betterment of humankind. Anyone. Even if we disagree on the specifics, right? Me and Jason do not agree on all of the specifics, but we get along because we are aligned in the right direction. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was said, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of the book where I teach you to do magic responsibly. It's 25,000 words. And if $20 is too much, this is a $20 book. If $20 is too much for like $5, you can get a YouTube membership and I will read it to you. Right? Join the channel. You can cancel. Like, I'm here to get the information out. There is a paywall for a reason. If I could have done it for free, I would have done it for free, but I was directly instructed not to. So, and that's where we're going to leave it. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.